This is Straight Outta Flushing, brought to you by your local Ford stores. Ford F-150 is the official truck of the New York Mets. What's good, everybody? Hopefully you had a fantastic July 4th weekend. It's your boy Dexter Henry alongside my guy, Tyler Ward, a.k.a. Wardy, with you for another edition of the Straight Outta Flushing podcast. Wardy, I had a fantastic July 4th weekend. How was yours?
Oh, it was great. I didn't let the Mets get to me. I enjoyed myself. Got a little cooked at the beach. It was an electric past 48 hours. And now here to start the week, we have ourselves this thing called reality. So let's deep dive right into it. Okay.
I have to say, I was on, shout out to our guy, Anthony Rivera, Subway to Shea podcast. I was on with him and you were brought up. People were asking, how is Wardy doing with the
How's
Mets?
Wardy doing?
They were like,
That's
how's
amazing.
Wardy handling all this losing for the Mets? And I was like, I think he's fine. I was like,
I'm
think he's fine.
just prioritizing having a day that more than I typically would in the past. That's the big takeaway this year for sure. Yeah.
I like that, man.
Yeah.
I like that. So self-care is important, folks. Self-care is important, especially when your team is maybe not doing so good. All right, let's get into it with the Mets. Some quick things to talk about first. The Mets, they ended a 3-game losing streak, Wardy. They win on Sunday, but did it feel like a win? Because it kind of felt like a loss. 10-9 win over the Braves. The Mets led 10-3 heading into the ninth inning and only won 10-9. And I don't know about you, I was convinced they were going to lose this game. I did not think they were going to win this. It felt very Atlanta-ish. I guess I'll ask you this coming off this. We don't have to get too deep into this because the Mets are what they are right now. But do you think a game like this can be? I don't know. Was it a good win, or was it just another reminder that this team needs to sell as soon as possible? What was this game for you?
As a consolation prize for like Andy Green and the offense, I think that they deserve some kudos in this being a little bit of a win. They didn't face the best pitching. I would argue that if they weren't facing a grizzled veteran and Martin Perez or a former Mets legend, now foe, and Cookie Carrasco, they probably don't fare as well in this Game 3 matchup there in Atlanta. However, the bats did come to play. They looked very good. Really nice turnaround for guys like Bo Bichette, AJ Ewing, and obviously Jared Young coming in later on in the game for Mark Vientos, who had another brutal day, both offensively and defensively, that I'm sure we'll talk more on in this video. Unfortunately, the Mets got a lot of offensive production. They don't put up 10 runs too often. So I think that in itself is a win for them for the now. But when it comes to, the greater matter at hand, as for the status of this team, it goes without saying that they're going to be fire sailing big time the next couple of weeks if they weren't planning to do so already.
Yeah, as I think they should. I like you finding the positives in there, Wardy. Looking at the offense, putting up 10 runs, you haven't seen that. I guess that is nice. One other person we got to talk about, Juan Soto. We know he was named an All-Star the other day, and listen, he's been playing well as of late. His batting average close to 300. I know some people don't love batting average anymore, but that's still nice. Do you think when you look at Soto in his year and a half here now, does his All-Star production make this season in particular more frustrating? Because the Mets, they've got their superstar. They've got this superstar piece here, Wardy, but they still look really far away from contention. Does that make the season more frustrating, even though we're getting to see Juan Soto be amazing on the field?
Oh, I mean, it goes without saying that's frustrating, Dex. I mean, think about it. The Mets are the second year in, the largest contract in North American sports history. A player in his prime as we speak, and the Mets are completely letting it be washed away. There is nothing more frustrating than a wasted talent, if you ask me, when it's circumstance like this. It reminds me a lot of, on a different scale, as a hockey fan, growing up, being a big New York Rangers fan, and a goaltender by the name of Henrik Lundqvist that many people know. He carried that Rangers team for years upon years on end, where there wasn't a proper supporting cast around him, especially in the first half of his career. So I see some similarity there from, one great player to another in this big market where, they're doing everything right. They're doing their job. It's no different than Aaron Judge is going to do his job when he's healthy for the Yanks. But when you don't have that kind of surrounding cast the way that you need, it just sticks out so terribly when you're investing the dollars that the Mets are, and knowing that, this is not going to last forever. We hope and pray that Juan Soto is dominating at the plate a decade from now. But we don't know what future holds when it comes to injuries. This is already the first year that Juan Soto is kind of dealing with a little bit more ailment than maybe what we're accustomed to. What does that mean as he gets older and becomes less viable in the outfield and is more of a DH option? These are the things I think about because the Mets have went 2 straight years now of completely washing away what is otherwise an MVP caliber talent to many across the game.
Yeah, and I think with all that being said, I worry about wasting the early part of this guy's prime. And will there be a situation where, got to remember, he can opt out in a couple of years? There's not winning done, and this is why I think these next couple of years are crucial for the Mets. If there isn't some winning done here, will he maybe want to bounce? Now, look, there's a lot that's going to be on Steve Cohen and David Stearns. We're going to get to them right now here. But Steve Cohen said he's worried about the Mets' future last week with our guys, John Heyman and Joel Sherman.
Which is a kind of insane thing to just casually say without realizing realizing who this is going to be said to. You know what I mean? Like, I appreciate Steve's bluntness greatly, and that's where you can see the fan side of him because, like, same. I'm worried too, buddy. Like, we're in this together, but like, you're the one that controls it all. So I'm like, I don't want to hear that from you. You know, like, I'd rather you lie straight to my face right now and tell me that, you know, we're uncertain as to what the future holds, but we're still optimistic with the decisions that are going to be had entering this offseason. Like 2 seconds could have said it like that, but no, Steve's like, no, we're really worried. The farm's cooked. I don't know how next season looks, you know.
I think he's worried partly because of what I'm just saying. He knows he invested in this guy, Juan Soto.
Well, here's the thing about Juan Soto's contract, Dex. It's uniquely structured here. So technically speaking, you're right. Juan can opt out of his contract 5 years in. However, the Mets can veto that opt-out if they give him an additional of at least $4 million a year, basically upping his AAV to $55 million a year for the remaining decade of that deal. So something that feels like it's going to happen will likely be the Mets doing that. But there is a world where, say, maybe by time Soto wants to hit that market again, and the Mets are so poorly structured, maybe they say to themselves at that point, you know what, Juan? We loved your time here, but we're not close to winning yet still. And you deserve to be on a team that's going to be more positioned to win. That would be the only way I could see that happening. But here's the thing, Dex, as each year goes on, that's becoming more and more of a reality.
Likely.
So who knows what's gonna look like by the time we get to year 5 and for Juan Soto.
Who knows? Now, we just mentioned Steve Cohen. We mentioned David Stearns. We reacted to this last week when Steve Cohen appeared on the show with our colleagues, John Heyman and Joel Sherman. Fantastic interview. Go check that out. You can also check out Wardy and I's reaction that is up on the New York Post Sports YouTube channel. One of the things, there's a lot of things that we had reacted to, but one of the things I don't think we really got into until our last conversation was, well, we did get into a little bit. We talked about Cohen's comments about David Stearns and job security. And initially he said he was going to see his 5-year contract through, which I said I didn't like his response to that initially. I'm not for change's sake, but you also don't want people to feel comfortable here too. Let me ask you this. If David Stearns is safe with his job right now, right, which we're going to take Steve Cohen at his word that he is, does that make the deadline more important because this is now fully his, meaning David Stearns' reset to manage? So does that make this upcoming trade deadline, which we're going to get into more in this episode, but does it make it uber important? Because look, man, Stearns, you're here driving the ship. You've got to reset things here. You got to get things right. You have to hit. You got to cook at this deadline. Well, we thought he cooked last year at the deadline, and boy, were we wrong. But this is a different kind of cooking this year. Do you look at this deadline differently, Wardy? Or are you kind of like, more let's wait and see?
Yeah, I mean, listen, whether we like it or not, as a fan base, talking as reporters alike, David Stearns is not going anywhere immediately for the New York Mets. He will at minimum be their president to begin the 2027 season. So knowing that and understanding that, knowing that the keys are still going to be very much held by him and the ball's in his court, it's imperative that he's able to rebound after what was such a failure of an offseason. This is now the perfect time for him to right his wrongs to the best of his abilities, okay? Owning up to the fact that it starts with you and accountability, which he has, regardless of them firing Mendoza, as well as you can hold yourself more accountable by showing that in your actions. You know, we always, you know how much I say proactive. It's like my favorite effing word on here because it's just so commonplace to say, where David Stearns just hasn't been doing that, unfortunately, as team president. But as we get to the deadline, Now's a great time and opportunity because the Mets can go about this in various ways that we're going to talk about shortly. But from the aspect of both buying and selling and the pros versus cons that come with them, the Mets can easily position themselves where they can head into 2027 where, yes, they're going to be without a lot of the current players on their roster per se, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing with everything that continues to go right for this club. If you have a rotten core or just something that's not looking good, ideally, you'd like to change that, especially in this New York market with the payroll of north of $300 million entering next season still and everything else that'll entail of what it means to be on the New York Mets.
Yeah, I think this is a very, very important trade deadline for David Stearns, where he's got to be proactive. We'll have more on that coming up later in the episode that we're going to talk about. But here's what we're going to do. We're bringing back a segment. It's called the 7-Line Report. We're going to get on the train right now. All right, for the 7-Line Report, we've got ourselves 3 stops on this train. First stop, you can count. I see the numbers there. You can do the math.
I can count to like 6. That's as far as I can go.
I think you can do better than that. I can do better. I know you can do better than that.
All right, 7. All right.
Hey, you were able to say 10, and the Mets scored 10 runs in their last game. So I know you can get.
You know what, Dex? You know me better than I do.
There you go. First stop is always going to be the local stop, and the local stop that we're going to talk about this week, AJ Ewing. He's been one of the young players that's continued to impress. But pause here. Mets fans, you know this. You've seen this before. You've been impressed with young players, and then you said, what happened to all that hype that we had years ago? So let's discuss this, Wardy. How close are you to saying that AJ Ewing is a real piece of the next good Mets team? And that's what I want to really put an emphasis on, that he will be here when the Mets are good and contributing, right? And how careful do you think Mets fans have to be here? Because as I said, this fan base, they've seen young players like this before, right? They've seen the flash, they've seen the conversation gets too big too fast and the person flames out. So where are you on AJ Ewing? Are you close to saying he's a real deal piece that could be part of the next good Mets team, whenever that'll be?
The reason why I'm so confident in AJ Ewing being a continuation win is because look at the trend so far in his career, beginning all the way in low A, which for context was only 2 years ago.
Right.
He has made in the strides that he's made over the past significant and trend upward for him. That's been the big takeaway. When we were skimmed last year, beginning the season in A ball, getting all the way up to AAA by the year's end, he was just getting better with every promotion for the most part. And some similarity to Carson Bench, who obviously is in the outfield with him now. But knowing that AJ has gotten to the big league level and is batting, currently speaking, roughly 15% above league average as a hitter, has a really good approach at the plate when it comes to poise, sitting anywhere from 260 to 270 average. But it's the power. In his first 50 games as a New York Met, is slugging. That's really important. Guy, obviously, that's showing you that he has more than just that slap ball mentality where he's going to, hit one down the first baseline, like a single into or have an infield dribbler to have success. Like, you can tell that AJ Ewing has power, including a home run he just hit lefty this past day at the time of us recording. And he's someone that can be so dynamic on the base paths. He's a multi-tool athlete. He's a 5-tool talent, one right. Might not be a power guy that gets you 20 home runs, but should be able to kind of be in that 10, 15 home run category, like years as a New York Met, for example. And knowing he's only 21 is why I'm so bullish on him, right? We think of, and comparing and contrasting, a Mark Vientos, for example, who broke out big for the Mets in 2024. But a big problem with someone like Mark, like that already, a bit at that point. So if I'm not mistaken, was 23, 24 by time, he was getting his look that season. And he's also someone that is polar opposite to AJ Ewing as a multi-tool talent. Vientos doesn't provide the bat to ball skills that you're looking for in the pass front. You're not really getting anything from him. He's a net negative in pretty much every other sector of his game. AJ Ewing, he's a positive in so many ways. The Mets are going to be more inclined to want to play him still in a Tyrone Taylor fashion, where you want his defensive base running in there. So that alone is why I'm really confident in AJ. It's the age, it's knowing how good he already is, and the thought of him only getting better with a deeper lineup and a better club morale around him. Because, I don't think the team morale is too up right now for a club, 15 or so games below 500 at the moment?
Yeah.
Just, I don't know. Just something I can't buy about it, Dex.
No, I get it. So the thing you brought up about AJ Ewing that I think we are not that we're on a different page about this, but we're really on the same page about is I've been impressed with the power. Everything that was advertised with him was okay, this guy's going to be able to slap hitter, he'll be able to get the ball to the gaps, he's going to wreak havoc on the base pass. And I generally love that kind of player. People who know Jose Reyes, one of my favorite Mets of all time. I love that kind of player that can bring the speed. I think what's impressed me is the ability to show the power here at this level. Again, he's not going to be a slugger like you said, but can he be a 10 to 15 homer guy? Can he keep that slugging percentage, around 400 that we've seen here or, somewhere in that vicinity? I think that's fantastic for him. If he can show you the power every now and then, if he can put fear into pitchers because of the multitude of ways that he can get on base, I think that bodes well. Now, the question was, am I close to saying that he's going to be a real piece of the next good Mets team? I'm going to say no. Because let's see. I like what I'm seeing, but I need to see more, right? Let's see how this season plays out. Let's also then see, because you brought up Mark Vientos in 2024 and how good he hits. Sometimes you have to watch with a guy. How do they then adjust the following year? There's always going to be an adjustment. The league's going to adjust to you. Pitchers are going to adjust to you. Then you have to adjust back. It even happens for pitchers. We're seeing it with Nolan McLean this year. This is going to happen. That's why I'm like, let's wait and see, because Mets fans, again, you've seen this movie before. You've seen guys you've been hyped on before, only to be let down. I'm not saying AJ Ewing is going to be let down. I also won't even say this about Carson Bench, because I do think there's something. What I will say is this. I think there's something to the fact that they're still producing despite the vibes not being at an all-time high.
Right.
Despite
That's
the
really
losing.
notable, especially for
Yeah,
young players, kind
for
of
young
needing to
players.
just pick themselves up each day.
Mm-hmm. And
Yep.
what did you talk to me about? I think this was before the season when we were talking in spring training, and you were so bullish on Carson Bench, and you were like, everything I've been hearing, and we ended up hearing this from other people too, the mentality, right? Like, I think we're very big on the mental approach. Baseball's a grind.
Right.
You're playing almost every day. You're going to have these highs and lows. How are you going to adjust? I think I've liked the makeup of both these guys, and we'll see how it goes, but we're going to see how they deal with the lows, how they deal with the transition, however the Mets are going to be. I'd say I think could be likely for AJ Ewing. I'd say I'm close, but ask me. We'll revisit this at the end of the season and see how I feel. But I think that AJ Ewing my friend, looks like he could be on his way. Okay, let's go to
my
yeah.
only counter regarding AJ. It's
Sure.
not even a counter, really. It's more so of if he's not a New York Met in 2027, like impacting them properly, I think it's because the Mets went an Andres Gimenez route and traded him early in his career. Not that I think that they need to or want
Right.
to. I know that they love him a lot right now, and there really is no reason to even consider that. But you don't know what the offseason is going to entail. Free agency is going to be really difficult because of the upcoming lockout, whereas trades are something that might be a more viable option for this team. It would not shock me in the slightest if the Mets traded an AJ or even a Bench, one of those two, because they have similar aspects of a profile, for a surefire guaranteed thing that's like a star level player. Like if the Mets are adamant on like contending in 2027, I'm curious how far would they be willing to go, even if it's to the demise of what us fans want to see. They've already done plenty of that by allowing Pete Alonso to walk among many other things. So how much more creative can they get, as David Stearns said, Steve Cohen said David Stearns needs to be entering next season because they have a little bit of a tight payroll. It's an interesting thought. Again, I don't want AJ gone, but that's the one thing I'll say. If he ain't here impacting, I think it's not because of poor performance. I don't think he'll be here. That's what I have to say. That would be
it. I kind of hope. I don't want to say I kind of hope they don't go that route, because you're right. So much depends on what 2027 is going to look like. How serious are they going to be about winning?
Right.
Feels like they have to be serious about winning, but who knows? We have no idea, and we will see. All right, next stop on the 7 train. We got ourselves a service alert. This is where we are going to talk about some issues, some problems. You never want a service alert when you're on the train. That's generally not a good thing. But here's the issue for the Mets. There's a lot of issues. Here's one. We saw it this weekend in Atlanta through the first 3 games of the series. Wardy, the Mets, they still can't play clean baseball. This season was supposed to be about run prevention. Did you hear about run prevention, my friend? Did you hear about that at all? Because I heard that. And we have seen more defensive miscues. And I'm not going to pile on this guy. And I had said this at the beginning of the season. I thought it was time for him to go. That is Mark Vientos. We saw more errors from Mark Vientos. I think we know Mark Vientos is what he is at this point, whether it's at the plate or in the field. But if we want to talk about in the field, do you think the issue with Vientos is just solely about him? The fact that he's never really had a position? Is it the Mets' developmental process with him? You could probably also apply this to other guys, Brett Beatty, Francisco Alvarez too. Or is this just simply what bad teams look like when they're experimenting and moving guys around in real time? Like, what is it for you, specifically with Vientos and even other guys? Where are you on this and with Vientos? Who's to blame for where he is right now?
As has been the case with the Mets in more ways than one with their failures, it's a collective effort here. So let's start with where their shortcomings have been on the development front. Okay. Mark Vientos was never an overly sound defensive player growing up in pro ball with the New York Mets. He was never known that. He was always known as a bat first guy who, if he thrived at the major league level, would probably thrive best suited as a first base DH option. That was before he even came in the bigs, and many scouts were highlighting that and had reservations with his ability to play proper defense at third base. He then kind of, rights those wrongs a bit or defies the odds and plays solid defense at third in 2024. And the bat carries so well that he wasn't really much of a liability there. And when he was, it didn't matter because his bat made up for it.
Right.
Even as you got into the postseason that year, yes, he had some big hiccups against the Phillies, but he also had a couple big bombs in like those same games. So it's like any time that he had himself a mental error, he knew to right his wrong with the bat. So what has happened since then for Mark Vientos, right? Well, the Mets haven't committed to him. That's a big thing for one. They went from viewing him as their guy to then quickly realizing he wasn't their guy, and they needed to kind of pivot and change course. And Brett Beatty became the more viable third base option last year for them as they continue to flip-flop with one another, basically. Vientos gets more limited playing time because of it. The Mets aren't happy with Vientos' sophomore slump. Clear holes in his swing, obviously, that maybe a team that understands player development a bit better over the past half decade than what the Mets have done. I like what Andy Green has done a lot, but it's not going to be gospel for every player. Every player takes this information differently. And Vientos is an emotional player, too. That's another takeaway. He has clearly been an emotional player since arriving with the New York Mets. Not like overly emotional, like, oh, he's a crybaby or anything like that.
Yeah.
But he's young. He's emotional. And you can tell that there are times where he does not know how to suppress them well because he's caught up in the moment, especially if he's not performing well and he's trying to find that 2024 success that feels like such a greater distant memory with each passing day right now. I think the Mets have failed Vientos and not being in his corner enough, especially after JD Martinez left after 2024. He was a huge helping hand for Mark that became obviously clear. Didn't have that in 2025. And that's why we had Mark stating to the media, including our great, Joel Sherman, the New York Post, among others, that, oh, yeah, I really haven't had like much of guidance this year. Like there really hasn't been anyone to help me, basically. Like he was being very blunt and honest right before the trade deadline, probably with an expectation that he thought he was going to be out of here. The Mets didn't trade him in the end because they said, you know what, we're not going to do that. And, they've just been really hurting his career in a lot of ways, I think, because they're throwing him at first base against a lefty when he should be DHing. Like, we're setting him up for failure for a guy who has consistently shown you he's not someone you should play in the field. It's no different than when the Mets in years past were still trying to make it work with JD Davis defensively, but it just wasn't clicking.
Oh,
like there are always players, and he's a similar profile too, when it comes to airmailing at third, then shifting to first, bat first mentality. And then once that bat is gone, he's a net negative in every other sector of his game. So I think it goes without saying that Vientos should not be a New York Met anymore. And I think it will benefit him just as much as it will the Mets. This feels like a soured relationship that I just don't see the purpose in trying to continue at this point. I'm grasping at straws, and I say this as someone who likes Mark a lot. I respect and admire their family. I met them before at spring training. They're very nice people, and they care about the game a lot and obviously care about their son. And I think for Mark, if you're trying to care about the guy, it would be great if the Mets put him in a position to succeed where I think we'll be elsewhere, where he can have not this type of media and this type of New York pressure on him. and can kind of find his swing again. I think he should be traded to a team in a bandbox, whether it's Cincy or not Philly, Coors, where have you, just somewhere, even throw him to Sacramento now that Brent Rooker's out for the year with injury. You know what I mean? Like, he can juice those offensive numbers up, gain his confidence, and then get his career back on track. I don't see a role where it's going to happen with the New York Mets. I really don't.
The last word you just used there for me with him, and I think we've just been watching it. The confidence has been down. It felt it last year, but you're really seeing it this year. The confidence is down. You're right. This is a systemic failure all around. But I think what's problematic to me, and we could talk about the Mets, their errors, kicking around the ball. They've got 15 errors in their last 15 games,
which is just
it's insane.
15 errors in their last 15 games. I'm surprised Keith Hernandez is still kicking right now. Like that makes me feel like I'm going to just drop out of my seat. Insane.
I mean, this is the thing overall with the run prevention. Just in the last 2 weeks, folks, Mets ERA 6.30. Okay, this is from the pitching staff. 6.30 ERA. They've allowed 10 unearned runs in that span in 15 games. And again, they've committed 15 errors in 15 games. That's an error per game, people.
Cue the circus music, Dex.
Yeah, you're right. Man, look, I think Wardy and I just having a discussion about Vientos. We're not saying that he is the poster child for it. And what I love that you said there, my friend, is this is a problem all around. The Mets did fail him too. This is not just Mark Vientos. Granted, I think his time here is definitively up. His value is extremely low. Get all that. And I'm sure Mets fans do not want to see him anymore either. I understand that. But things looked so great for Vientos a couple years ago. Now they don't. He isn't the only person. Brett Beatty has not ever found himself a position or hit well enough to warrant staying there at a specific position. Francisco Alvarez, even to some degree, despite him handling the pitching staff well and being beloved in that clubhouse, it's been a disappointment offensively. And look, I say that with him as somebody who's had some freak injuries, so I have a little bit more of a pause and maybe a little bit more of a leash in terms of time for him. But I'm sorry, at some point, the Mets have to be accountable for this too, and they have to start hitting, and guys have to start to be developing, not just at the plate, but also in the field. This booting around the ball, what are we doing? And to your point, can we really be mad at Mark Vientos when we already know who and what he is, and that he's never been known for his glove? His glove never developed as he rose through the ranks of the minor leagues.
We can't sit here and be shocked from somebody we've known from a mile away.
Right.
Like, I can understand him more in the inception of his career starting and everything, and like us getting a taste as to, but we've been here. Like, this is year 3. What are we doing? Like, why are we acting surprised by this? Why are the Mets acting like that there's juice left in that tank when clearly there isn't?
Right. And to have it put out there, I understand where fans are like, yeah, this is enough. I don't need to see this anymore. I think Mark Vientos has come to the end of the line. Speaking of end of the line, that is the third stop on the 7-line train report here. And at the end of the line, we're going to transition, as we're going to do in this episode, talking about trades a little bit. Wardy, I think you and I agree. This is honesty check time where the Mets are right now. The Mets have to be honest at the trade deadline. There's no time for lies. You can't lie to the people. You can't lie about yourself. You have to look yourself in the mirror and know exactly who you are. And this team is a bad team, okay? And they need to be, to use Wardy's favorite word, proactive. It is that time. So, but how are they proactive? And this is good. We're going to then transition out of this into a larger discussion about this. But I guess what I will ask you is, okay, what kind of seller should David Stearns be here? Should he only move obvious short-term pieces? Or do you think he should be aggressive? I know you like to be aggressive at times in terms of building a team. And should he try to cash in on anybody who is clearly not going to be part of the next core? How do you think, what should the approach be for this deadline for him? Move the obvious short-term pieces, because I do think there are obvious ones, which we'll get into soon. Or do you think he'll be aggressive and say, hey, you're not going to be part of this core going forward, whatever that's going to be. Let's get you up out of here. How do you think he should play this?
So can you reference what players exactly you're referring to there? Are you just talking in generalities about the team?
You talking about what players I think that will be obvious trade candidates or won't
So
be?
we're starting with the obvious trade candidates, is what you're saying, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Who do I think those would be?
Yeah, I think we both have the answer to that when it comes to the obvious ones.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
know?
I think for me, for one, and we'll get to this more in a second, but I think Freddie Peralta is absolutely one.
Of course.
That you gotta move on from here. One that I'm iffy about. I wonder how I don't know what the organization will do with Clay Holmes, but if he could be obvious, but I can see why some people might say he might not be obvious. Um, I think that's obvious. I think Brooks Raley, you got to move on from. I think
Right.
AJ Minter is another one. Um, those four I'm probably putting in dead obvious. If you can move them, you got to move them.
Okay.
Because I'm going to hold on that for a second, but those, because there might be some more I have here that I want to debate with you in a second. But yeah, those are my obvious ones that I'll put there for now.
Okay. Well, then my obvious ones, if that's what we're hopping into right now, correct? I'm going to probably be going with Vientos, because even if he's DFA, they have to do something there. Like,
Yeah.
that goes without saying. Like, what are we doing? Another obvious, I think, should be Brett Beatty. Love Brett. Wish him well. Where's the room? Another obvious, Jared Young. Like Jared. He's been solid. No need to have him beyond this season. And then we get to 4. And you already mentioned Clay. You already mentioned Freddie.
Mm-hmm.
Kodai's tough because if you can get something for him, you do that. But I don't know what the status will be there. He might be more of a DFA option at this point for the Mets. We'll see. 4, I would say as an obvious one, because it will be uncomfortable if I pick another player that I'm thinking right now. So I think for number 4 on an obvious, that's an easy one. Anyone need a 4th outfielder? Tyrone Taylor's right there.
Good. Now, yeah, hold that, because I'll hold that for a second. I want you to hold the players you named there for a second. Okay. Because you have some obvious, I have some ones, and I want us to then shift these into categories for people and how we think about them. But back to the question. Do you think David Stearns should only move the guys that are obvious? Or what do you think that should be part of the plan?
That's yes. To answer your question,
because to answer that question, do you think
we do not stop at obvious?
Okay,
that's what I think.
Okay, so
I don't think we should stop at obvious.
Okay,
I think we should get into some uncomfortable territory. Is what I think the Mets should be doing. Yes.
Okay. So for this deadline, you would like the Mets to get in some uncomfortable territory. There are going to be some players that they're going to have to make some tough decisions. All right. I agree with Wardy on this. That brings us to the end of the 7-line report, because we both agree that the Mets have to get in some uncomfortable territory. So why don't we get a little uncomfortable with everybody as we end the 7-line report? We talk about who the Mets should exactly trade. Okay. You just asked me about obvious sell candidates. Okay. Let's go what we had. I said Freddie Peralta. I said Brooks Raley. I said AJ Minter. And I said Clay Holmes I'm going to leave off for now, because I think Clay Holmes is uncomfortable. Can I put him in?
I agree. I think Clay Holmes is uncomfortable because I would love nothing more than for the New York Mets to try to figure out an extension for him. Like, he's someone I would really like to see next season. Still,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I had 3. And then yours you mentioned Vientos. I do think it's an obvious sell. You also Jared Young, obvious sell.
Oh, Canada, baby.
And your last one was?
We had Beatty, and then we also had Tyrone Taylor. All the fringe players that the Mets would not be losing sleep over if they didn't have playing right now. Yeah.
Okay. Of this group, we have 7 players that we just talked about. Who do you think brings you the biggest return?
Freddie.
Agreed.
Yeah. Even though Freddie has not pitched overly well, as an understatement, teams will bank into the track record. They'll bank into kind of, maybe him just not adjusting to the New York market well. They'll look at the Mets being an absolute dumpster fire defensively and knowing that may go in hand a bit. They will look at all those things and player evaluation for Freddie, and will not solely look at what's been a not so great first half of the season for him.
I agree. I think for the Mets, you absolutely have to sell him. Some contender is going to believe that he can help. He's an expiring contract, looking for he was looking for extension. That's not coming now. You got to sell him. What do you think about the bullpen arms I mentioned? Raley and Minter.
Raley and Minter, absolutely need to trade both. Two guys I don't want to deal. I would love to see them in this bullpen next year, but they're also not getting any younger, and I don't know how they're going to look next season either. I don't know how their velocity is going to look. And, there's too much uncertainty with the Mets to think, oh, we got to make sure that we have these top dog lefties, when in reality, if they position themselves this offseason to really focus on being a competitor in 2027, they should be able to find that relief pitching, okay? Saying should for a reason, because Will's a different conversation when it comes to David Stearns. But AJ is going to get you a great return right now. Of course, the first run he's given up all season was like his 16th outing. Who did he give it up to? Old pal Matt Olson, lefty, because why wouldn't he? Brooks Raley, he's been very solid this year per usual. Hasn't been his sharpest every time, but he's gotten the job done. Yeah, the Mets should be able to get solid returns for them. But to throw it back to you when we talk about uncomfortable guys in this conversation, another one that comes to me,
Luke Weaver,
is Luke Weaver.
I knew you were going there. Because he was in my uncomfortable list too. I think so. Here's why. This is what I think we're on the same page with this. Wardy, for me, the uncomfortable candidates are going to be people that have team control beyond the season, that have shown you enough this season. Like Luke Weaver has been really good. He's been damn good. But I don't know if you automatically keep that guy, or you feel like they're more valuable at the deadline. Like if someone's Luke Weaver and Clay Holmes are my two probably most uncomfortables I'm talking about right now for me.
Because Weaver's a tough one, because like he's handled the New York market well, great personality, loves it here. You can tell that he's very comfortable. My concern with Weaver is the Mets not maximizing on his trade value now. We get into next season, doesn't pitch nearly as well in the first half because relievers are just so fickle.
Yeah,
and we've seen this with Luke as well. He did this in his second half for the Yanks. Granted, it was injury adjacent, but that doesn't mean it can't happen with the Mets. Everything that goes wrong tends to happen with the Mets. So I think the Mets need to look at this as what is their greatest certainty. And their greatest certainty is getting a really nice return for Luke Weaver at this trade deadline. As much as I do not want to see him go, he would make a lot of sense to trade if you can get a return that is like, if you could get a substantial prospect return in hand because of him, because he becomes one of the most desirable relievers at the trade deadline, why wouldn't you do that if you're the New York Mets, who, as Steve Cohen has been quoted here on the Post the past week, stated, I'm really worried about the immediate future in direct hand because our farm has not been performing as well as they hope it would. No better way to juice your farm than to maximize these assets at this year's deadline.
I agree. A fan had tweeted at me yesterday, I think it was Danielle, her name, and she said, I don't want to trade Weaver. And I said, look, I get it because he's been good. He's been really good. It's a really good signing by David Stearns. But I'm with you. I think this might be his height. And I think you got to sell at his height. And you can get yourself a pretty good return here. Now, Clay Holmes obviously was pitching great before the injury. He's been a really good signing. He pitched well for the Mets last year. This is another good move by David Stearns. I think we could always bash David Stearns for some of the moves we think that are bad. More coming on that later this week. But Clay Holmes is tough, man, because I think he's a quality starter that you can have at the back end of your rotation. He's shown that he can pitch here in the New York market. I think that's valuable. I'm less inclined to trade him than I would Weaver. Do you feel the same?
You're less inclined to trade who instead of Weaver?
Clay Holmes than I would to trade Weaver. I'm like you. I would try to get an extension done with Holmes. That's what I would try to do.
I agree in the sense of Clay, because even though you should be able to get a really good return for him, and at the end of the day, if the Mets trade Clay, I'll be upset, but I'll go on with my life as long as I know it was a side.
I hope so, Wardy. I don't want you miserable.
I don't know. It's been tough these past couple of years, Dex. We're hanging on by a thread. But I would say that Clay's value can be more substantial for the Mets longer term than Luke Weaver, right? Like Luke, we don't know what we're necessarily getting heading in next season. You can make that argument with Clay, but if you hold on to Clay, get an extension done, hopefully it looks similar to what he did in the first half and the second half this year, returning from his broken leg fracture injury. And then you have him in still one more year, unless the Mets buy out the final year of his contract and help juice his extension. If maybe, they're like, we kind of underpaid you the first 2 years, we're going to do you right here. unless that happens, the Mets get Clay Holmes for right around 10 or so million for his final year of his contract next year. Like, that's insane bargain. Like, the money he's making is pennies in comparison to what guys in today's market usually make for his type of production with the amount of innings that he can give you when healthy.
Yep.
So, yeah, I agree with you. Clay is a harder one to trade away. But when we talk about who can net you probably the best return right now, if it's not Freddie, it's going to be Clay, especially because that contract status is so appealing to teams, knowing you have that certainty for next year, and it's not hitting anything hard when looking at the luxury tax for the most part.
Yeah, that's the thing. He will be an attractive piece for teams that maybe are trying to be a little bit more fiscally responsible, and they are concerned about what's going to happen with the new CBA. Will there be a salary cap? All that stuff.
Right.
Clay Holmes is valuable whether there's a cap or there's no cap, which is part of my reason for wanting to hold on to him, but also understanding that you could get a lot of value for him. Wardy, here's my thing. Is there anybody else on this team that's in that uncomfortable sell category? Who I want to know where you're going here. I had a name, but I wasn't sure if I'm going to put him in keeper. We'll get to the keepers in a second, or uncomfortable. Who else are you putting in this uncomfortable trade category? I do have one other person too, but
there's two, and I'm sure one of them I'm going to say that is who you're thinking. Both of which play the same position. Luis Torrens and Francisco Alvarez.
And Francisco Alvarez was mine too. Okay, let's get into it. All right, let's get into it.
Great reporting has been dropped over the past day by our friend Will Salmon that many of you guys know. And in that piece, you guys may see me highlight as well on my YouTube channel later on this evening at WardyNYM. We're going to be leaning into how, both these guys, while the Mets don't necessarily want to trade them, they're going to get a lot of attention leading into the deadline. Teams are desperate for catching talent right now. Torrens is an absolute mainstay defensively for you, and an opposite field Kane with runners in scoring position. Like, they're just aspects to his game that are very appealing for many teams in today's market. Francisco Alvarez is the biggest domino of all because he is the most polished out of himself, Mark Vientos, Brett Beatty, Ronnie Mauricio, that young baby Mets group, you could argue. He also still brings a level of uncertainty. You talked about Alvarez's defense earlier. I would actually say that Alvarez's defense is the biggest problem with him. Yes, he has loops in his swing, and yes, Alvy swings through his shoes and makes Javi Baez look like the most disciplined batter imaginable sometimes. But we see defensively for Alvarez, he has fallen off a cliff since his rookie year. It has really been uncomfortable to see how much Alvarez went from looking dominant as a young, high-rising catcher at the age of 21, 22, to then completely forgetting at times his fundamental play as a defender. And now Alvarez back post-torn meniscus surgery. He's looked okay defensively, but as a game caller, as well as someone who is comfortable in making throws in the infield, he has not been that steady for this Mets team. And at times he's been a detriment to them defensively that we saw earlier this season and in many phases last year. Alvy's only at the age of 23, 24 or so. Like, for many guys, this is guys just starting their career, and he's already been in the league for basically, north of half a decade already. I don't want to see him go. I still have belief that he can be the future backstop of this team. But if the Mets can't properly develop this man, he's going to quickly go from being their future backstop to being mainly a DH option, and then someone who the Mets are going to part ways with for a return that they weren't hoping for versus a couple years prior. Alvarez is not someone I want to see go, but if you are the New York Mets, if you're saying, how can we maximize our return at this year's deadline? There would probably be no player that you can maximize that return better with than a guy like Alvarez and the control he has. Now, do you want to put that in David Stearns' hands as the follow-up? You probably don't. I don't. I don't know how you feel, Dex. There are many things I'm uncomfortable with the thought of David Stearns handling right now just because he doesn't have the track record in this market to tell me that he can handle it well. But the Clay Holmes signing was nice. That's one wrinkle out of 100 things. I don't know. You let me know, Dex. What's your thoughts on this uncomfortable conversation surrounding Francisco Alvarez and maybe his uncertain future?
It is an uncomfortable conversation because the age is a factor here. As you said, only 24, right? Alvarez is making $2.4 million this year. He's avoided arbitration. Luis Torrens, just want to add of note, and how much money the Mets have invested in the catcher position. Luis Torrens, his deal over the next couple of years, he'll be owed just over $10 million. So on a good contract, you have one of the best backup catchers in baseball. So the Mets could have some flexibility here. I think the key thing for me is what would the Mets get for Francisco Alvarez if they traded him? I also am not willing. I don't want to give up on him that easily. Would another team want to trade for Luis Torrens for a backup, or do they feel they can get another good backup catcher elsewhere? That's the thing. The Mets have locked him in for another couple of years, and that's good. But are they going to be ready to win next year? I don't know.
And then the counter is, if you trade, say, Torrens, who's the more defensively polished catcher, away after you extended him and you're trying to compete next year, who are you replacing him with? What's the thought process there? You know what I mean? Because you don't really have internal options to consider.
Yeah, that's
are going to make that leap yet. You know?
Yeah, that's a problem for me, Wardy. That's why I think they're actually probably more inclined to keep both of these guys and let this rock for a year. If you want to revisit this next year at the trade deadline or after next season, I think you can. Just because the money you're paying at the catch position just really isn't that much. And maybe you're hoping Francisco Alvarez can be healthy, turn it around. Because I do think next year's the year we're talking about where, all right, it's too late. How long are we going to say this? How long are we going to kick this can down the road? We're going to say, is Francisco Alvarez going to be healthy? Could he possibly put it together? I'll take it. I think I was the one person who said I think he thought he would hit 30 home runs this year.
I thought so too, Dex. This was the year
again.
And the annoying thing is that you continue to see these shades of Alvarez. That's the annoying
shades.
Thing.
Yes, I agree.
You still get these splashes, a couple times a week, and you're like, you son of a gun. Like I need this just a little more, Alvy. And then I can't have these games where you're going from a nice 2-for-4 game with a bomb or an RBI double, and then the next two you're like swinging through your shoes, 6 strikeouts. I'm like, we can't be having that. We need more discipline here, Alvy. I need you to lock in for me, please. No one else is. Please, Alvy, help me.
The Mets need him, and if they could hit it it would be great. But at some point, you have to start saying it can't be ifs. You're right. The market for catchers is out there. Some team would want to take a chance on him. They'll still look at the same reason, say, hey, he's young. He's 24. Maybe you could turn it around. He gets in our system, yada, yada, yada. We'll see. I do think that's an uncomfortable conversation. My gut says to me the Mets stand pat and hold what they have at catcher going forward just because of the cost control and the limited amount of money that they're investing into the catching position right now. So why not kick it down the road another year and see what you got there? Anybody else for you in the uncomfortable candidates?
Uncomfortable. Yeah, there's a big one. Dex, do you want to lead it away?
Yeah, I think I know. Yeah. I think I know where you're going on this.
Yeah, this is probably the most uncomfortable of all.
I'm not, and I want to be clear. I'm not putting this person in the uncomfortable situation, but I'm going to refer to a tweet that was out by our colleague John Heyman, who said that everybody on the Mets should be for sale, except for Juan Soto, Nolan McLean, Christian Scott, Carson Bench, and AJ Ewing. And I retweeted that and I said, can't say I disagree. Now, there's a notable person left off that list, people, and that is Francisco Lindor. And I think most people, and I had him here myself, in the keeper category. There you go. Got ourselves the Francisco Lindor statue there. I still will put him in the keeper category, but this is an uncomfortable conversation if you want to talk about putting him as an uncomfortable sell candidate. Some may say the future of this team is around Juan Soto. I think we actually all would agree on that if you're being reasonable. Just the money
you got it. How old's Lindor now? 32, going into his age 33 season next year. Yeah, Soto's entering age 27, I think.
Right.
Like, these pale in comparison. Age 27, 28. Like, no. Yeah, the 5-year gap between Lindor and Soto of at least 5 is exactly why this will now be Soto's team moving forward, just on timeline. That's how it is. We knew that heading into this. The first year, we didn't think it was going to be completely, but like, especially after seeing, how Soto continues to carry himself, like just the way that Soto plays is just like Lindor wishes from an offensive standpoint. Obviously, he doesn't. Lindor has such ebbs and flows in a season, whereas Soto, even at his worst, is still so many guys at their best.
Yeah, the Mets have to pick a timeline. It's basically what I think we're saying here. They have to pick a timeline, and this is an uncomfortable conversation. You would like to see it where they could win with both Lindor and Soto, but Lindor will be 33 in November. Okay? He's going to be 33 in November. Soto was paid to be the face of the franchise. You could say Lindor is right now. Lindor's had some injury issues the last couple of years. So now you start after thinking about all of the stuff. Here's the problem. Lindor's 5 years left on his deal with a lot of money left to move. It is not going to be easy to trade his contract. Now, one thing we've seen from your boy, David Stearns, is that he will get off a contract that he doesn't think is good. We saw this with Brandon Nimmo. I'm not saying that Brandon Nimmo and Francisco Lindor are the same. I think Lindor still has good years left in him. But is it at a high level where you might want to reset and think about upgrading at shortstop? Possibly.
My question is what's the upgrade at shortstop?
Well, that's the thing. And how
you know what I mean? Like who could the Mets realistically land in a massive separate haul that's going to give them a bigger upgrade over Lindor's?
If you make this move, my friend, you're going to be downgraded for some time. Right?
At least this season. At least at least one. It has to be.
There's not this immediate thing that you're going to come and replace. It's going to replace Francisco Lindor. And we can say whatever we want. Look, you know about his defense. Generally, before recently, he's shown up every day, playing as many games as possible. Will play hurt. We've seen this from the guy before. We know all this. I don't think the Mets will trade him. But, and this is where I was agreeing with John Heyman on the tweet, and I think people were looking at it. You got to think about it. You got to think about it because you have to identify a plan and a timeline. And it would be shocking, but I tell you what Wardy would say if it happened. I'm not saying Wardy's jumping for joys and pulling out the Mets pom-poms and saying trade Francisco Lindor. What I am saying that you're saying, Wardy, is they did it. It might be being proactive. It just might be being proactive.
It might be. Listen. Might be. Listen, at the end of the day, I said heading into the season on record on my platform, maybe here with friends as well, because they talk about Francisco Lindor's future. I said Lindor is going nowhere unless the Mets don't make playoffs this year. If the Mets don't make playoffs this year, everything opens up. Everything's different. Yep. Everything changes. And that's exactly what we're looking down the barrel of right now. So I don't think it's nearly as asinine of a remark to make than maybe, this time last year, for example. You'd be like, are you kidding me? Lindor was like our MVP in 2024. Kick rocks with that notion. Now it's different. A year can change a lot of perceptions. And I think as the year goes on, we'll see where fans fall in the category of pro versus anti Lindor staying here or not, that kind of thing.
It's going to be very interesting. I still am going to put him into the actual keepers category. But since I'm still going to have him there. Who do you think are you with John Heyman's list?
John knows a thing or two that he's talking about, right? From McLean to Scott to Ewing to Benj. I think the only argument I would make is I think one of Ewing or Benj is definitely guys that I could see not here the whole time as much as I want to. There's something about it. And I think it goes in hand with Nick Morabito a bit or whatever. AJ and Carson are the best profile of the type of players that they are in this organization as multi-tool talents, lefty hitters especially that, can really spread for all fields, base run greatly, electric defense, and having more than one is awesome. I love the fact that the Mets have the outfield that they currently do. It's a shame that this outfield is kind of being wasted at the moment. Having said that, though, it's like when you have overlap a player and you're still missing that stardom that would take a team over the top, you can't see a world where the Mets would trade for, say, a star in the next calendar year without one of those two outfielders likely being considered in that deal, especially if the Mets find themselves trading for a bat that maybe he's an outfielder. We don't know. Like they did for Luis Robert. That's failed miserably. But Luis Robert was nothing of a certainty when it came to health status, and that was the big wrench. Can David Stearns finally realize that, if I'm going to make a blockbuster trade, I'm going to do it for a guy that is sustainable, he's consistent, he's going to do his job kind of no matter what, and he will be on the field more than anything else.
But he's going to have to be willing to pay whatever that price is.
Exactly. And that price would more than likely feature at minimum one of Benj or Ewing.
To be clear, I know you're not saying this, just to be clear for the audience, we're not saying parting with them at this.
Correct. I love them to death. Right. I don't want either of them gone. There's a reason why even a lot of Mets alumni right now are raving over these guys more than anyone else.
Yeah. At this trade deadline, just talking about this trade deadline coming up, I think they are both keepers. I do not think you can move them. Now, could that change in the offseason? Sure, it could, especially depending on how they want to play things for 2027. I don't think there's another guy I could definitively say that's on this roster right now that I'm going to say you have to keep other than the ones we mentioned. I'm going Lindor, Soto, the 2 young outfielders, and the 2 young pitchers is where I'm going. In my opinion, everybody else can go. We didn't even mention, I think should be, I don't know, is what can you get for this person? To go back to obvious sell candidate, Kodai Senga.
Yep.
He should be obvious. Buy. You could say
he could be such a good reliever if you just use him for 2 innings, or just.
But you know what's
one.
crazy?
Like
what's crazy,
I
Wardy?
think the stuff is still there for him if he's just not such a. And I don't mean this as a slight, but there's an old saying about being either like a mental midget or just not having the mentality that you want as an athlete, transitioning to different roles because of adversity and things along those lines. And unfortunately, Senga has just reeked of a player that when it comes to adversity and all these kind of issues, it just feels like he's just stuck in there. Like from an outsider's point of view, it just looks like he's trapped. He's trying to get out, but no one's giving him the key to get out. That's my interpretation of the situation. I don't know.
I felt some of that last year at the end of the season when he was supposed to come back and pitch, and then it was like the whole thing when he wasn't ready, and I was like, what's going on here? Is this, I was thinking the same thing as you. Is it more mental? I don't really like speculating on that too much, but I thought about it. Here's the thing that's so disappointing for me. When Senga was signed, especially after his rookie year, I said, this is one of the best Mets signings in their history.
Billy Big Bucks, big signing at the time. I know.
It was a great signing. For the first year, it looked like a great signing. First year and a half.
Amazing. No one could hit his ghost fork. It was remarkable seeing how much swing and miss he got that first year.
And then, now I'm saying obvious sell candidate. Obvious.
That's what happens when you can't stay healthy every single season since.
Where are we putting, before we get out of here, where are we putting Sean Manaea?
Oh, obvious. If you can trade him, you trade him.
Yeah, there you go. If you can move him, and what can you get for him?
For sure. But Sean's been pitching better, thankfully, the past month. Yes. Velo's been up a little bit. Yep. The Mets say, hey, we'll eat as much of the contract as we can. I don't know if they can get all the way to 50%. I don't know the exact percentages across the game currently. But whatever the highest percentages that the Mets can eat of Sean Manaea's deal, you do that. He just has 1 more year remaining on his contract. Help that with the trade value and have him go to a contending team that will be able to kind of, utilize him in kind of a David Pearson way, and just hope that he has greater success than Pearson giving up 10 runs in 3 innings 48 hours ago for the Cubs.
Yeah, he's looked great since he's moved on for the Mets, but Mets fans don't have to see that anymore. Him giving up all those runs. Look, that we're on the same page. The uncomfortable ones is probably the most interesting thing I think for fans to discuss. The names John's mentioned, I know John Heyman did not put Lindor in there. I will put Lindor in the actual keeper category because I don't think he'll be moved. I do think you have to have the conversation. I do think you have to think about it. I do think you have to think about the timeline. I think that's another conversation for another day, probably in the offseason. What is the timeline for this Mets team going forward? Who is part of this core? The young guys we mentioned, you hope they're part of the core. We have another conversation down the road that Wardy can have about whether or not, if you're going to get a star, will you have to trade one of these young guys? Where's the other pitching coming from? Is there another pitcher on the rise? Is it Jonah Tong eventually? Though his stars seem to diminish a little bit. We will see. Either way, it's July 6th at the time of us recording this, and we are in trade season, people. This is what we are in right now because there's not much else to look forward to in the New York Mets season. So let us know what you think. Who do you think should actually be a part of the Mets' future going forward? Let us know in the comments. Who do you think is an obvious sell candidate? Who do you think is an uncomfortable sell candidate? Who do you think are the actual keepers? Please let us know in the comments what you think should be done. Wardy had himself a good weekend. You could see he was out in the sun, enjoying himself. He's got a little color, a little redness to the face now as he's been out there. We'll see what the Mets do this week. We've got more coming your way this week on Straight Outta Flushing. Wardy and I will be back in studio together with another episode later this week that I think you guys will absolutely, positively enjoy. We'll try to have some fun with it and not depress you too much with the play of the Mets. That is my guy, Tyler Ward, a.k.a. Wardy. Always check him out. Give us a subscribe. Hit that like button on the New York Post Sports YouTube channel. I'm Dexter Henry. We'll catch you next time, people, on another edition of Straight Outta Flushing.